Taoiseach, yesterday's vote in the House of Commons is serious, grave, and creates real uncertainty and indeed anxiety. No clear or coherent view has yet emerged from the British political system in terms of the type of Brexit that would command a majority of British parliamentarians. And in our context, we know that a no-deal Brexit would be very damaging to the Irish economy, indeed to the UK economy, and indeed to Europe as well. And that is why we must double down on our efforts to be ready and to prepare comprehensively for a no-deal Brexit. In Ireland, our decision from the Fianna Fáil party to continue with the confidence and supply has spared us the mayhem and instability and uncertainty that is evident in the British system, and that would flow if a general election had been precipitated here. But, Taoiseach, when it comes to Brexit, the government must be honest with the Oireachtas and with the people. It needs to be honest in relation to the potential impact of a no-deal Brexit on our politics, economic potential and social well-being. The government needs to be honest in terms of all of the preparations currently underway concerning a no-deal Brexit. It should share all of its analysis in terms of pensions and social protection, for example, and publish that analysis. It should publish its analysis on the implications of a no-deal Brexit in terms of our budgetary projections on revenue and indeed on expenditure. But yesterday's exchange, Taoiseach, between the Taoiseach and the Minister for Transport are deeply worrying in that respect, because it suggests that the public are not being told the full truth for party political reasons. I get the same sense at times in terms of the government not revealing the full details of its plans for a no-deal Brexit. Minister Ross, as you know, replying to a question concerning a truck travelling from Scotland by boat to Larne could proceed to the Republic, and would there be checks? And he said, and I quote, "I would anticipate that there would be checks," unquote. The Taoiseach said in reply, quote, "Yes, but we can't get into where they'll be at this stage. They could be in the sea. They could be ... But once you start talking about checks anywhere near the border, people will start delving into that. And all of a sudden, we'll be the government that reintroduced a physical border on the island of Ireland." And to which Shane Ross replied, "Yeah, but I didn't know what to say." Clearly, he didn't do his homework. So, Taoiseach, it seems that there's a private understanding and knowledge. Now, this obviously was a conversation that was never meant to be public. The microphones were still on. But it seems there's a private understanding and knowledge within government about a border in the aftermath of a no-deal Brexit, but that at all costs that private understanding must not be shared with the public. Isn't that a fair conclusion to be drawn from the exchange between the two ministers? It's like the episode from Fawlty Towers. Whatever you do, don't mention the war. But somebody forgot to tell Minister Ross. So, Taoiseach, who is telling the truth here? Were members told not to mention were ministers told not to mention the possibility of some checks being done or in place in the event of a no-deal Brexit? And is it the government's position that border checks could be at sea? And how realistic is such a proposition anyway?
Taoiseach.
Thanks very much, Deputy. First of all, I want to say that as government we very much regret the vote that occurred last night in Westminster to reject the withdrawal agreement and the associated joint political declaration. A no-deal exit is something that would be very bad for Ireland, for the United Kingdom and for all of the European Union. A no-deal scenario would leave us with no guarantee in relation to there not being a hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland. It would leave us with no protections around citizens' rights and freedoms, and of course it would have a major impact on jobs and the economy, particularly the traded sector, SMEs and the agri-food industry. So we must do all that we can in the coming weeks to avoid a no-deal exit of the UK from the European Union, but not in a way that compromises our fundamental positions. This is a problem that began in Westminster with the referendum on Brexit. We found a solution. The withdrawal agreement, negotiated over months and months, agreed by 28 governments, and now Westminster has rejected that solution. So the problem lies in Westminster. And I welcome the fact that the Prime Minister has said that she is now going to engage with senior politicians from all parties to see if they can come together with a way forward with a Brexit that commands a majority in the House of Commons. But whatever they come up with must be acceptable to us in Ireland and the European Union as a whole. In terms of the budget impacts which you mentioned, the budget is planned, was planned and written with Brexit in mind. That's why we've provided for a budget surplus. That's why we've provided for a rainy day fund. It's also why we've provided for a 25% increase in capital spending, 1.5 billion extra being invested in infrastructure in Ireland to give the economy a bit of a boost at a time when there's a risk, obviously, of a significant slowdown. In terms of plans for checks, we are obviously now implementing the no-deal plans. It's no longer contingency planning. We're implementing our no-deal plans, and that provides for checks at ports and airports in Dublin and Rosslare. We're not planning for checks along the land border between Northern Ireland and Ireland, nor are we planning for checks in the sea. I can't imagine how you would carry out checks in the middle of the sea, quite frankly. I think they can only be done at ports and airports. Everything that Taoiseach has said is very consistent with our position that we stand by the backstop and we stand by the withdrawal agreement. And I think his only concern, and it's genuine concern that I have in answering questions on this issue, is that if you use the wrong words or you say things in the wrong way, people will misinterpret that as though you have some sort of secret plan to impose a hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland, and we have no such secret plan.
What the Taoiseach just said is that the border checks could be at sea. I didn't say that, nobody else in this House said that, but the Taoiseach just said it to Minister Ross, albeit he thought he was saying it privately and that it wasn't caught on microphone. Now you're saying clearly that it couldn't be at sea. And the Taoiseach went on to say that once you start talking about checks anywhere near the border, people will start delving into that, and all of a sudden we'll be the government that reintroduced a physical border on the island of Ireland. So the emphasis has been, we'll be the government. So whatever you do, don't mention the border, he is saying to Minister Ross. Don't mention it. For God's sake, don't mention the border, because we'll get tired with it. And that's the last thing we want. Has that conversation happened with the European Union? Has the government shared that view with the President of the Commission and with Michel Barnier? And you might answer that question, Taoiseach. I mean, what is your take on the exchange between Minister Ross and the Taoiseach, and the Taoiseach's reply to Minister Ross? And it's the Parliamentary Office, the Independent Budgetary Parliamentary Office, Taoiseach, that said the government had in the aftermath of the budget, made the comment that there's no projections in terms of revenue and expenditure. Taoiseach?
I'm not sure exactly what you're driving at here, Deputy. What the Taoiseach was referring to was checks on goods moving from the UK to Ireland. That is what the backstop provides for. The backstop and the withdrawal agreement provides for checks on the movement of goods between Britain and Ireland at the ports at Dublin Airport, Rosslare, and also at the ports in Northern Ireland. That's what the withdrawal agreement provides for. That's what the backstop provides for, which is checks on goods on trade between Britain and Ireland. In relation to the budget, I mentioned already how the budget was planned with Brexit in mind. All of the economic analyses that we have so far from Copenhagen, from the SRI, for example, indicate that there would be a slowdown in economic growth, but not that we would enter recession. Some people feel that is a little optimistic, but that is the projections that we have from ESRI, Copenhagen Economics and others, that in the event of a hard deal, no-deal Brexit, that the economy would slow down, not that the economy would go into reverse. And that's why we built those buffers into the budget, a surplus, a rainy day fund.
Last night, as predicted, the Brexit withdrawal agreement negotiated between the British Government and the European Union was overwhelmingly rejected by the British Parliament. As was the case during the Brexit referendum debate, the vote last night again reflects an absolute disregard for the interests of Ireland and for the international obligations of the British state to honour and implement the Good Friday Agreement. Indeed, there is an unmissable hostility to Irish interests in some sections of the British political establishment. The level of Brexiteer delusion is perhaps best summed up by the commentary of the DUP leader yesterday, when she claimed that we never had a hard border in Ireland. That is manifestly not true, and it illustrates clearly that Brexiteers don't deal with reality. And I'm sure you don't need me to point out to you just how worrying that is. Because with every day that passes, we lurch closer to the possibility of a no-deal scenario and the return of that hard border. Yesterday, prior to the vote in Westminster, the Taoiseach briefed us on contingency plans in the event of this situation, and these contingency plans focus on East-West matters. They're very important matters to protect trade and commerce between our islands. The Taoiseach has said that the legislation required to deal with these matters won't be published until the 22nd of February. Sinn Féin will assist in crafting and passing all necessary legislation, but I do have to say to you that you're coming to all of this very late in the day. So I think you need to revise that schedule, and we need to see that legislation before that. Taoiseach, however, the Taoiseach had nothing to say on contingency planning to protect our all-island economy, to protect citizens' rights and indeed to protect the Good Friday Agreement in the event of a crash Brexit. Last night, as has been said, the Taoiseach and Minister for Transport were at odds in respect of checks on goods crossing the border in the event of a no deal. The Minister for Transport said there would be checks, the Taoiseach said there wouldn't. Now, they can't both be right. So who was right? Taoiseach, was it Shane Ross or was it the Taoiseach? I think the reality is that in the absence of a backstop, there will be a hard border and there will be checks. And you've skated around this issue time and again. But isn't it now time to say out loud that in the absence of a deal, there will be a hard border? Isn't it time to reassert that this is an unacceptable, indeed an unconscionable situation for us, to state clearly that we will not, that you will not, under any circumstances, accept a hardening of that border and the chaos that would follow from it for citizens in their daily lives. So I ask you, Taoiseach, to state unequivocally that the backstop remains the bottom line, and that you will defend that position and that there will be no resiling from it. And can I also ask you to set out the Irish Government plan to protect our all-island trade and economy, our society and our peace agreement in the event of a no-deal, no backstop Brexit?
Taoiseach.
Thanks very much. Deputy, I very much agree with your initial remarks. We had a hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland. I remember it well. During the Troubles and, of course, prior to 1992 when the single market came into effect. I remember it very well, crossing it as a child and in my early teens. There were customs checks. I remember the 24-hour rule, and I remember seeing soldiers. And I never want to see any of those things ever again on our island. Between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, and that's why I've been working so hard to secure an agreement over the past year and a half. In terms of legislation, we'd expect to have the heads of the Brexit Omnibus Bill within the next 2 weeks, ideally by the end of next week, and that will give essentially a very clear picture as to what is in the legislation. And of course, we're open to input at that point from opposition parties as to whether it covers everything that needs to be covered. And we'd anticipate having the final bill ready for publication on the 22nd of February 2019. But it is a big task, and that's why yesterday when we produced our legislative programme, only 6 pieces of legislation are on that priority list for publication this session, 3 of which are linked explicitly to Brexit. In terms of avoiding a hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland, words aren't enough. And I hear people saying all the time, I hear this analysis that there won't be a hard border just because nobody wants one. It doesn't work that way. The only way that we can avoid a hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland into the long term is by having an agreement on customs, a common customs territory or customs union, and regulatory alignment, either between Northern Ireland and Ireland or between all of the United Kingdom and the European Union. And that is what we negotiated in the withdrawal agreement and the backstop: a common customs territory and regulatory alignment, so that there wouldn't have to be a hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland. So it's not good enough for those who rejected this agreement to just say there won't be a hard border because everyone says there isn't going to be one, or because no one who wants one. We have to have a political agreement that must involve a single customs territory, must involve regulatory alignment. There are lots of ways of doing that. There are Northern Ireland specific solutions, there are UK solutions, but that's what has to happen if we're to secure an agreement and if we're to ensure that a hard border doesn't emerge on our island. In relation to your question, yes, absolutely, I'll defend the backstop. But the backstop is there as a means to an end. Let's not forget what the backstop is. The backstop is a legally operable legal guarantee that the mechanisms will be put in place to ensure no hardening of the border between Northern Ireland and Ireland. It's the outcome that we need to achieve, and I stand by that absolutely.
Taoiseach, and I'm well aware, as you are, as to the intent and content of the backstop, and I welcome your assertion that you will stand by it. I take it that that will remain the case irrespective of what overtures might be made or what pressure might come from the British government or from other quarters. And the backstop is necessary, as you correctly say, to avoid a hard border, and therefore it logically follows that in the absence of that backstop, the border hardens. And that results in many, many things, including checks, as goods cross that border. And what you have failed to do, again, Taoiseach, is to set out the contingency in that eventuality, and it's not one that I wish, or I'm sure anybody in this House wishes to see pass. But what happens then? The contingency legislation for East-West matters has been dealt with, and we will see the legislation. The question, though, the big question that remains is what happens as regards the border on the island of Ireland and all of the consequences, not least for the Good Friday Agreement. What is the contingency plan for that? Because make no mistake, Taoiseach, as sure as night follows day, if there is a crash, if there is no backstop, a hardening of the border follows automatically. And what will you do? I agree with you that you should not, under any circumstances, be the government that reimposed a hard border on the island of Ireland. But that begs the question again. What do you do? What do you propose to do? And what is the contingency in that set of circumstances?
Deputy, the government of the United Kingdom and the United Kingdom has given the people of Ireland and Northern Ireland a commitment that Brexit, their policy, will not result in a hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland. We have come up with the solution. We have it in the withdrawal agreement plus the backstop. That is how we avoid a hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland. It is now for those who rejected that solution to honour their commitment to us that there will be no hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland by coming up with an alternative solution that does exactly what it needs to do. And the ball is very much now in their court. I don't believe they'll be able to come up with an alternative solution. I don't believe they'll be able to come up with something that departs very differently from what has already been agreed, unless they fundamentally change their red lines in relation to the customs union and the single market. But we stand by the withdrawal agreement. We stand by the backstop. Westminster has rejected it. It's now up to Westminster to come together to develop a solution to what they believe is a Brexit that they can pass through the House of Commons. But whatever they come up with has to be acceptable to the European Union and has to be acceptable to Ireland.